In the lesson for February the 8th, we continue our study in Nehemiah, and we continue looking at what happens after they had completed the building of the wall. Last week we looked at the celebration that followed, but now we're going to take it a step further in this week's lesson. I heard a story one time about a man who was filling out a form, and one of the questions was church preference, and he answered it red brick. That man made the mistake that a lot of people make, thinking of the church in terms of a building rather than in terms of a people. Nehemiah did not make that mistake. He rebuilt the walls of the city and recognized that the temple had been rebuilt, but he realized that that was not really the people of God. The people of God was the people themselves. And now that the wall had been built, they needed to be spiritually revived so that they could accomplish what God wanted them to accomplish in the future. And the way Nehemiah recognized to rekindle that spiritual fire in the hearts of the people was to refocus on the law of God. And that's what this lesson is about this week. It is a refocus on God's law and a response to that. And we'll look at chapter 8, beginning in 1 and going through verse 12. Now, in verse 1 of chapter 8, the Bible says that all of the people assembled. And then verse 2 says, so on the first day of the 7th month, Ezra, the priest, brought the law before the assembly. And all of a sudden, we are reintroduced to Ezra. Where has he been? We read about him back in the book of Ezra, and originally Ezra and Nehemiah actually went together. They were kind of a combined book. And so we have Ezra playing on center stage in the book that we know as Ezra, and then where Nehemiah starts, we've gone through 7 chapters here, the rebuilding of the wall, and there is nary a mention of Ezra. So where has Ezra been? Some suggest that Ezra had returned to Babylon to carry out some business, had returned to Persia to carry out some business there and had just returned to Judah. Others explain his absence in this way. Ezra was kind of the religious leader with this group of exiles who came back from Persia. Nehemiah is the political leader. So what has been happening in the first 7 chapters of Nehemiah is the rebuilding of the walls and the protection of the city, more of a political issue. But now that they turn their attention to the spiritual issue of rekindling the spirituality of the people, Ezra, who is the priest, comes back to the forefront. In this second viewpoint, they would say he's been there all along. He just has been in the background as the story unfolded in these first 7 chapters. So whatever the answer for that is, the fact of the matter is that Ezra is now here. And he is the one who will now lead forward in this rekindling of the spirit of the people. Verse number 1, when Ezra comes back or reappears in our story, the people say, bring out the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord has commanded for Israel. So we see a perception among the people themselves that they need now to refocus on God's law. And verse 2, it says that the assembly was made up of men and women and all who are able to understand. Now, we need to recognize that in this time, women were not always included, and we might even say not usually included in the group of those who listened to the reading of the law, because it was perceived that perhaps they couldn't understand that. But in this passage, now